This is Akashvani. In the program Insights, now we bring you a discussion on Mission Chandrayaan, India's stride in lunar exploration. The participants are Pallav Bagla, science journalist, and Omvesh Upadhyay, anchor.
The Indian Space Research Organization is in the final stages of preparation for the Chandrayaan-3 mission, which is a follow-on mission to Chandrayaan-2. ISRO planned this spacecraft to exhibit India's soft landing proficiency on a stellar body. And today, to discuss on the updates and significance of India's Chandrayaan-3, we have with us science journalist Mr. Pallav Bagla. Welcome to the program, Mr. Bagla.
Thank you very much.
What right now we know is that the Chandrayaan is an ongoing series of lunar space exploration program of ISRO. So, Mr. Bagla, highlighting the success and overall journey of Chandrayaan-1 and Chandrayaan-2, could you please share with our listeners the significance of Chandrayaan-3?
See, Chandrayaan-1 was India's maiden mission where India stepped out of the Earth's gravity and went to the moon. The moon is our nearest celestial neighbor and the easiest to reach. So when India decided to step out of the Earth's gravity, the moon was the nearest object, which is why Chandrayaan-1 was designed by the Indian Space Research Organization, and it was a highly successful mission. Initially, the mission was named Chandrayaan, and the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee added 1 to it, saying that India is such a big country, you cannot have just one mission. So Chandrayaan became Chandrayaan-1, and subsequently we had Chandrayaan-2, in which India attempted a soft landing on the south pole of the moon. Unfortunately, the Vikram lander and Pragyan rover could not complete their tasks. But yes, the orbiter for Chandrayaan-2 even now continues to orbit around the moon and give us data. Now ISRO, the Indian Space Agency, is going ahead with the follow-on mission, like you said, for Chandrayaan-3, which will have a kind of a module, propulsion module as an orbiter, and then a lander and a rover. So the key aspect of Chandrayaan-3 is to attempt soft landing on the near the south pole of the moon, and that is, nobody has attempted a landing near the south pole. So again, India is attempting something which is not easy, but fingers crossed. I think sure Chandrayaan-3 should be a success, but unless it succeeds, we have to wait and watch.
Absolutely. And speaking at the NVS launch event, ISRO Chairman S. Somnath shared that Chandrayaan-3 launch date will be around in the mid of July, that is next month. So when we know that all the preparations are in full swing to meet the deadline this time, Mr. Bagla, would you please share some updates on this news?
See, you can't approach the moon all the year round. There are certain windows when you approach, because the moon is in a slightly elliptical orbit, and then when it's closest to the Earth is when you want to approach the moon. So the launch window for launching Chandrayaan-3 is beginning on July 12th, and then it will continue for a few days, and the preparations are going on in full swing. The spacecraft, which is the Chandrayaan-3 spacecraft, which was made and designed in Bangalore, has reached Sriharikota, which is India's spaceport, and is today being mated with the launch vehicle Mark 3, which is the launcher which will be used to launch Chandrayaan-3 from Sriharikota. So the preparations are ongoing, but there are tests which need to be completed, and once those tests are successfully completed, then we should see a launch of Chandrayaan-3, hopefully in the middle of July, and then it will take several orbits around the Earth to gather more velocity and then head for a translunar orbit, go towards the moon, and then again go around the moon for several orbits, and then attempt a landing of the Vikram lander and the Pragyan rover on almost on the same spot like which was attempted last time. But Chandrayaan-3 is a more advanced spacecraft compared to Chandrayaan-2, and the Indian Space Agency has certainly learnt lessons from its failure in the past of Chandrayaan-2, and they have implemented many changes which should see Chandrayaan-3, in my opinion, succeeding and putting India's flag on or near the south pole of the moon.
In an overview, what we know right now, Mr. Bagla, is that Chandrayaan-3 aims to examine the shadowed south pole part of the moon, as you said. So, what experts suspect right now is that it can have the presence of some permanent water or ice source and also the mineral stocks. So, the groundbreaking success of Chandrayaan-1, can we hope a same outcome with Chandrayaan-3 regarding the findings?
Well, these are scientific missions. These are exploratory missions. To expect and say that there would be a breakthrough, I think would be putting the cart before the horse. Chandrayaan-1, which was India's maiden mission to the moon, gave us spectacular results in finding the presence of water molecules on the moon surface. So, in follow-up, after that, many people, especially NASA and other space agencies, found presence of water ice on the moon, which is why India is attempting to place Chandrayaan-3's Vikram lander and Pragyan rover very near the south pole of the moon, because that is where, if ever a human habitation has to be established on the moon, it would probably be near the south pole of the moon where there is presence of water, because water is essential for life. People may be surprised. I am composed of more than 70-75% of water. Every human being has that much water. So water is essential for life, and if you find solid water ice, I should say, then the chances of having habitation are much higher, which is why Indian Space Research Organization is attempting to land Chandrayaan-3 near the south pole of the moon.
And here I want to understand about the technicalities of the mission, Mr. Bagla, and please simplify all process for our listeners. When we know what experiment mission will do is on the in-situ environment, then there is also subsurface and exosphere examination. What are that?
Any scientific mission has many objectives. The Chandrayaan-2 orbiter is still going around the moon and sending back scientific data which Indian and overseas scientists are using. Vikram lander and Pragyan rover both have a series of scientific instruments on them, and the attempt would be to understand the surface of the moon, to understand a bit of the chemistry of the moon, to understand what is on the subsurface of the moon. But I think the prime objective is to prove soft landing by India on a celestial object. I think if we get a soft landing on the moon, I think that would be a great achievement, and all the scientific data which we get would merely add value to the mission. So Chandrayaan-3 is an important mission by India because essentially, see, after that there are big missions coming up by ISRO, which is Aditya, which is to study the sun. You have Gaganyaan, which is to launch Indians in space from Indian rockets from Indian soil, which is essentially to launch astronauts or Gagannauts into space. And you have a likely mission to Venus. So there are plenty happening. It's a very exciting time, and the research and development work will continue at ISRO, whereas there's a new space policy which has been announced, which exemplifies that the commercial part would then be taken off and given to the private sector. So these are very exciting and very bold times, I must say, for the Indian space community.
You very rightly said about the bold time of Indian community and the space sector that India is exploring right now. Whenever we talk about how ISRO especially is achieving so much of global role right now in terms of providing commercial success and emerging as a reliable space agency, how do you see the increasing Atmanirbharta of India and ISRO in the space sector, and also the emerging role of ISRO?
The objective through which the Indian Space Research Organization was established was that India would have end-to-end capabilities in space. Today, India makes its own rockets, makes its own satellites, but more importantly, the downstream activity, which is very important, which is remote sensing, use of remote sensing imagery, use of data which comes from satellites, is very, very, very high. And the Indian Space Research Organization has done marvelously on that. And today we also have a constellation which is giving us navigation data through Navik. So that's also an important part. But end of the day, proof of the pudding lies in how much value you can provide to the Aam Aadmi or the Aam Aurat. Anytime you and I go and do a transaction on an ATM machine, whenever I go and withdraw money from an ATM, one should remember it always links up to a satellite somewhere. So every time you withdraw money, it is thanks to the Indian Space Research Organization satellites. And even now, the rupees 2000 note is slowly being phased out. But whenever you have that in your pocket, you have to see it carries the image of Mangalyaan on it. So space in some way or the other is very heavily linked to our daily lives. More than that, we are currently going through the cyclone which is in the Arabian Sea. The monitoring of Biparjoy cyclone would not have been possible had it not been for the constellation of satellites which India has. Remember, before these satellites came into existence for India in the 1970s and 80s, 300,000 people died in a cyclone in Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. Today, the deaths due to cyclone have come down to double digits. Amazing. Even a single loss of life is big, but to reduce loss of life in lakhs is an amazing achievement by the Indian Space Research Organization, and that is why I say whatever money has been spent on the Indian Space Agency has been given back to India more than 100 times by the Space Research Organization, and we are witnessing that today as Biparjoy is ravaging parts of Gujarat and the west coast of India, and that monitoring that would not have been possible without satellites.
Absolutely. And since we are entering the concluding stage of our program, I would like to take your opinion on the new space policy that India introduced this year, and with more space for the private sector and a shift of ISRO towards dedicated R&D, what's your say on the new space policy?
Space policy was long in the making. We had disjointed, separate policies for remote sensing, separate policies for SATCOM, separate policies for human space flight. Now, the government decided that we needed an omnibus space policy, which will be the India Space Policy 2023. The space policy is a very broad document and very readable. Anybody who reads it will understand it, and it clearly spells out the roles for all the players. And the role it spells out for the Indian Space Research Organization is that it will continue to do cutting-edge research and development work, whereas the commercial activity would either be hived out to the private sector, but there is a growing startup sector in space, and there are more than 100 startups which have mushroomed in the last couple of years, and we even had a launch by one of the startups, Skyroot, from Sriharikota. So it is a very exciting time, and the private sector can hope to reap dividends from the space policy, and the Indian Space Research Organization can expect to do its work, which they are very good at, which is to do cutting edge research and development, and then take Indian astronauts into space through Gaganyaan, which is the most expensive scientific experiment India has ever undertaken. And we should see steps towards that which are happening, and if all goes well, very soon we'll have an Indian astronaut or Gaganaut in space, and amazingly exciting time for India and for the Indian space community.
And with your insightful input and beautiful examples, I believe our listeners might be able to understand that despite the fact we are a small blue dot in the cosmos, but it is our efforts and imagination that help us to explore beyond horizons. Thank you so much, Mr. Bagla, to join us on Akashvani.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on Mission Chandrayaan, India's stride in lunar exploration. The participants were Pallav Bagla, science journalist, and Omvesh Upadhyay, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 928-909-4044.